This week on the IoT podcast.
That's one of the things that Eero has been synonymous with, actually, is keeping it super simple and making it really easy. And is that one of the kind of foundational elements that you see in connectivity within homes and businesses that Eero set out to accomplish and has achieved?
Our work is never done. Customers are never satisfied, and there's always more we can do. But that really was part of our founding premise is, at the time, you open up your browser, you type in an IP address, you look on the bottom of your router to find a password, and then you're presented with an interface, and you might not know what any of it means, and there are lots of buttons and lots of things to click. How can we make setup happen in a few minutes using a mobile app? We've accomplished a lot. Of course, being on the inside, there's always so much more that I want to do, but I think we've done a pretty good job with the user experience so far.
I actually got my dad onto it. My dad's 75, and he actually said, how easy is this to set up, right? If my dad can do it, then I think anyone can do it. So to explain for people who may not know Eero, how does it do what it does, and what's the concept of an Eero device in a home or in a business?
Yeah, it's magic. I can't tell you. Things will go wrong. You'll bring a device home and try to get it on the Wi-Fi and it won't work. Your internet will go down, and there's half a dozen at least reasons why that could happen. So we spend a lot of time building capability behind the scenes to understand what's happening, and then over time translate that knowledge or that data into the term we like to use, our insights. We spent a lot of time making it really simple for our products to be automatically updated and kept up to date. And we've made a really strong commitment to keep our products working for a fairly long time. Even if things pop up that we need to go correct, we have that capability. To me, it feels like we've still just scratched the surface of kind of ease of use and helping customers understand why things are happening or how they can fix them. So I think there's certainly innovation happening there.
For you and on behalf of Eero, in terms of exciting possibilities in the future, is that again, the further adoption of Matter, increasing standards and so on, is that what's kind of really kind of driving innovation forward with you guys?
Welcome back to the IoT podcast. I'm your host, Tom White. Every week we are joined by the biggest names in IoT to unravel the trends, misconceptions and predictions for the Internet of Things. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're watching or listening on, and turn on that notification bell so you're never out of the loop.
Gabe, welcome to the IoT podcast.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Tom.
I'm really looking forward to it. I said to you in our kind of discovery post even pre-podcast call that I've been using Eero myself for a number of years. I actually got my dad onto it. My dad's 75, and he actually said, how easy is this to set up, right? He even turned his kind of router into a modem, plugged it in, did all those bits and pieces at 75. So if my dad can do it, then I think anyone could do it. But it's great to have you on and get into a bit more about your business and what you do. So without further ado, could you give us a bit of a background on who you are and how you got into where you are today, Gabe?
Absolutely. Gabe Kassel. I'm a principal product manager at Eero, now part of Amazon. Eero was acquired by Amazon. We became part of the Amazon team about 5 years ago. And I've been at Eero a little over 9 years. So I was on part of the founding team before we shipped our first product. But kind of stepping back from there, my background had nothing to do with consumer electronics or networking. I actually worked in digital marketing and advertising at large tech companies for several years. And I found Eero, and it was like finding an oasis in the desert. I think similar to the story of our three founders, where I was the IT person for all of my friends and family. You described your dad. It's the same, I think, for a lot of us, where I'd have, starting as far back as high school, I'd have friends that would call me and they're like, I need you to come over and fix my Wi-Fi. And so I found Eero and saw what we were trying to do in fixing, improving connectivity, and it clicked for me. And so I've been here almost a decade, still trying to make connectivity in homes and businesses just work and be seamless. So that's kind of how I got here.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's really nice that you've been there, pre Amazon acquisition and subsequently post now and where you are. I think one of the things that I feel personally with Eero, and I know my peers and my friends have both within the industry and also my personal life, is just the ease of use, right? It's just so simple. Like changing a password or SSIDs, etc. It was almost a bit like the dark arts, right? When we looked at Wi-Fi and home connectivity in the past, and that's one of the things that Eero has been synonymous with. Actually, is keeping it super simple and making it really easy. And is that one of the kind of foundational elements that you see in connectivity within homes and businesses that Eero set out to accomplish and has achieved?
Well, first I'd say our work is never done. Customers are never satisfied, and there's always more we can do. But that really was part of our founding premise. Is at the time, the state of the art was you open up your browser, you type in an IP address 192.168.1.1. You look on the bottom of your router to find a password, and then you're presented with an interface, and you might not know what any of it means, and there's lots of buttons and lots of things to click, and so that was very foundational to where we started of how can we make setup happen in a few minutes using a mobile app, such that, elderly people or, not even just people that are not tech savvy or are just busy can get through it very quickly and just get going. And so definitely that was where we started. And I think we've accomplished a lot. Of course, being on the inside, there's always so much more that I want to do, but I think we've done a pretty good job with the user experience so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Because just talking about it now, like I remember, as you say, going into to a browser, typing in the IP, logging in, and seeing this like really poor UI from something that looked like it was in the late 80s. Right? It seemed as though, well, it's always like that thing, right? It's so obvious when it's done, but no one did it really, or no one made it as prominent as Eero did. Why do you think that is, just out of interest?
I think one reason that I can think of is sort of the type of people that are doing the types of work involved. If you think about, at least stereotypically, who would be working on a Wi-Fi router or home networking gear, like they're the nerds, like they're the people like me that want to go in and configure a lot of settings and want to be able to tweak and tune a lot of things. And I think one thing that Eero did early on that was kind of unique was we brought together people with a lot of different subject matter background and user experience and human interface design type people, really to think about, let's start with the lay customer and work our way backwards to how do we get them to accomplish the goal of setting up their network. And so I think we ended up with a user experience that was far different from what was kind of common practice at the time.
Yeah, completely agree. And now it's just so simple, right? You simply plug them in, they work. You've got a mesh, and it's almost archaic to think of how we used to do it and what it used to be like. And I think that's really prominent when it comes to kind of IoT and setting up and managing, growing numbers of IoT devices, generally in homes or businesses, is often overwhelming. So to explain for people who may not know Eero, how does it do what it does, and what's the concept of an Eero device in a home or in a business?
Yeah, it's magic. I can't tell you. I think Eero solves a few different challenges in a few different ways. So we've already talked a good bit about the setup and onboarding user experience of you unbox this thing that converts the internet coming into your home to wireless Wi-Fi, which itself is absolute magical alien technology. And we spend a lot of time demystifying and kind of making that experience simple. But then there's so much more to it around, a big promise of Eero is extending or expanding coverage. So you have a corner in your house, or you have maybe a granny flat or a pool house, or whatever your situation may be. One area that we've innovated a lot is around what we call mesh, basically allowing you to take multiple Eero devices, plug them in, pepper them around your home, and they'll automatically connect to each other, extend coverage, pass data from one to the next. And we have a lot of unique bits around how we do that. But at the end of the day, we're able to eke out better performance, better reliability than a lot of what existed, 10 years ago with traditional wireless repeaters. So it's really setup and onboarding and ease of use there, mesh or coverage extension, and then related back to ease of use is kind of a genre of troubleshooting. Things will go wrong. You'll bring a device home and try to get it on the Wi-Fi and it won't work, or your internet will go down, and there's half a dozen at least reasons why that could happen. So we spend a lot of time building capability behind the scenes to understand what's happening, and then over time translate that knowledge, or that I guess that data, into the term we like to use, our insights. So imagine you have a device that's trying to connect to your network over and over and over with the wrong password. Well, what we can do is in our app, we can say, hey, you have a device that seems to have the wrong password, and then walk you through some troubleshooting recommendations around, how to reset the device, or, here's where to find your password in the Eero app, and some helpful tips around that. And so I think that's where there's a lot of magic to help people at those acute moments when they're really frustrated.
Yeah, I think some of the insights, it is really quite eye-opening as well. One of the things that I've noticed from being a user myself is actually seeing the amount of devices connected, or devices trying to connect. I think everyone's got the story of someone pinching the Wi-Fi from the coffee shop or from the neighbour upstairs. And you can see that really easily with Eero, where you couldn't previously, because you had to kind of look into the computer and what was connected, or even looking at like the packets and analysing the packets, etc. But the average user just isn't going to do that, right? So that's, again, another real benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, and with that, we give a lot of tools to help manage, right? So lots of parental control related tools, where if you want to pause kids' devices on a schedule, or only give them a certain amount of access to the internet per day, or if you just see a device show up and you're like, I don't really know what this device is, it has a strange name, it's very easy to go into our app and just block it, prevent it from talking to the network and to the internet until usually that's a great way to figure out what device it is, because at least in my household, my wife will come yelling at me that something, she's like, I'm trying to turn the fan on and it doesn't work, and I'm like, oh, I blocked that device because I wasn't sure what it was. So yeah, there are a lot of really, really helpful tools to manage your devices, because that's, connectivity is kind of fundamental to our daily lives now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you touched on it earlier about the story of mesh and how mesh came around. So what kind of sets Eero apart when we look at maybe like true mesh, and what would you say is true mesh as opposed to mesh? Because that'd be quite nice to clear up for our listeners.
Yeah. So a lot of systems that talk about mesh or talk about range extension, they're often using what's termed as a dedicated backhaul. So in these wireless access point products, you typically have 2 or 3 different radios and bands. And so for your listeners, they may be familiar with 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. And now, starting with Wi-Fi 6E and into Wi-Fi 7, we have new spectrum with 6 gigahertz, which is really exciting. But often, as a simplifier, the backhaul or the mesh extension portion will only send traffic across one of those radios. And if you think about each of those radios, it's kind of a set amount of capacity. And the way that Wi-Fi works, when one device, one person is sending data, everyone else has to be quiet and just sit there listening. So what Eero really innovated on with True Mesh, and why we call it a True Mesh, is we mesh every single radio that we have in every product to every other Eero peer that we see around us. And then roughly once per second in every direction, we make a decision about the fastest path to get data from one Eero to the next. And so it's not even how do we get data from your client device back to the internet as fast as we can, but imagine you're moving a file between two computers on your network, or you're printing, or you're doing AirPlay, or Chromecast. All of those kind of local communication conversations, if you will, we pick the best path in every direction. And so we call it a true mesh because it is a fully connected mesh where every Eero, every radio is connected to each other, and we're constantly kind of making those decisions about how to pass traffic through the network.
Yeah, that's mightily impressive. It reminds me actually of many years ago working with satellite navigation businesses when they talk about Distrecker's pathfinding algorithm, right? So the process of just being able to take that quickest route as quickly as possible. And to do that,
yeah, I was going to say the math is actually the same. I have a colleague who is one of our founding colleagues. He has a background in graph theory, which is basically the mathematical study of what you were kind of describing. And so I've actually seen him kind of write down that math before, and it's basically the same, like how you triangulate or how you find the fastest path between 2 points. That's exactly how our mesh works, where every connection gets a score, and we basically add up all those scores, and whichever path has the lowest score, I guess, because it's like golf, that's the path that we take. So it's the exact same science.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these things transcend over the years, right? So the other aspect that you mentioned there around how Eero is able to monitor devices being connected is the security element, right? So a lot of the topics that we have on the podcast is around IoT security and simplifying the security process, because sadly, as you know, probably more so than many people, Gabe, is that security often doesn't reach the forefront of people's minds, right? Consumers, they want to know it's secure, but actually, do they want to go through hassle in order to do that? And Eero really does simplify that, being able to block devices, as you mentioned, or look at security across that mesh. And so that'd be interesting just to delve into a little bit as well, if we could.
Yeah, I think where I start on security, it's exactly what you're describing, at least in the residential space, where if you ask a customer, do you want your devices to be secure and private? Of course, they're always going to say yes. But then if you say, okay, well, how? What do you know about this? How are you going to do it? Blank stares, it's overwhelming. And so I think, again, the topic of security and privacy, we kind of take a lot of the same tenets and approaches that we take to the product overall, where it has to be simple and it has to be very approachable. And so I think one example or a genre of an example that I think of is really just having sane defaults and not letting users get themselves into unsecure or bad situations. And so at the most basic level, if we look at the wireless encryption and authentication protocols that we use, when we started a decade ago, it was very common for routers, access points to allow you to use WEP or WEP as well as WPA version 1, which even at the time, a decade ago, it was known that both of those were completely insecure, could easily be cracked. But a lot of routers would continue to allow them because customers would have legacy devices that required them. And we took a different stance where we basically said, if you have a device that uses that encryption, you should replace it with a different device. Like it was so well known that those were compromised by that point in time. We just didn't even give you the option. I think similarly, WPS, the wireless protected setup, it was another example where we're like, we're just not going to support this in the product because we know that it's bad for customers. But it's always a trade-off. There are other technologies, like UPnP, Universal Plug and Play, where customers want their Xbox to just work. And from a security posture perspective, it's a tough call. but we made the call to kind of lean on the side of customer experience and simplicity to make your Xbox work, but then over time build tools so that you're more aware that that's happening. And if you want to turn it off, or if something strange is happening, we can give you that ability. So I think, again, user experience is kind of where we start. And then, of course, we have services like the Eero Plus service that wrap together DNS-based security, VPN, and a few other technologies to again just take the complexity totally away from you and give you some guarantees that we will use a DNS provider that is highly private, very low latency, very secure, and can block malware, phishing attacks, like all these bad things happening on the internet in a way that you just don't need to manage it yourself. So I think that's where I kind of start on security. And then behind all of that, I think that there's a whole aspect of, we just build a really high quality product, and we have a lot of security engineers that spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. And I think that our brand, hopefully, kind of it stands for some of that, where both the Eero brand and, of course, now being part of Amazon, the quality bar for things like how our physical device is secured is so incredibly high that it's almost like bank level security that we're putting in your home. There's definitely a lot more behind it, but overall, just making it really simple.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole purpose of this thing. I've got a friend of mine who's an advisor to the UK government on cybersecurity, and he's often quoted by saying, if it ain't secure, it ain't smart, so it can't be a smart device, right? So I think there's layers of kind of baked in protection that you do, but equally, we all know that security is a gold plating exercise. So, like, how many more layers and layers and layers of security do we want to add? And the consumer just kind of wants it to work. So I can understand it's got kind of you're at odds really with which way to go, but ultimately, if the consumer isn't going to use it, but work it from a residential context, then that's actually going to be detracting from the overall product proposition as well, right?
Yeah. I think one other thing that you kind of reminded me of is no one's perfect, right? And so we're always going to find I saw one in the last few weeks of an esoteric Wi-Fi attack that some researchers had published that I still don't fully understand. But I think what I'm getting to is we spent a lot of time making it really simple for our products to be automatically updated and kept up to date. And we've made a really strong commitment to keep our products working for a fairly long time, so that even if things pop up that we need to go correct, we have that capability. And we've pushed out a lot of updates. There have been situations. I think there was a Wi-Fi attack or vulnerability a few years ago called Crack. We patched our whole fleet of devices within about 24 hours. And we were well ahead of the rest of the industry by, in some cases, weeks or a couple months. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we can react really quickly as things evolve as well.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, right? To be able to move as quickly as possible with these things and work in a kind of pair with, the wider community, the security community around there. I guess that brings me on quite nicely, actually, to the next part about new products coming out into the home. Obviously, we've got new standards, etc., which of course means new product lines potentially from Eero. So, do you want to talk about some of your newer products that are coming out, Gabe?
Yeah. So recently we announced the Eero Max 7. It's our first Wi-Fi 7 based Eero device, and it's the highest performance Eero we've ever built. Supports over 4 gigabit per second across the wireless mesh. I mean, these numbers are getting kind of crazy. Has 10 gigabit Ethernet. So, I think especially in the UK, there's a lot of 10 gig deployment, but also in the US, in North America, we're seeing it as well. So it's really dang fast. That's almost expected at this point. But it also, of course, being a Wi-Fi 7 device, has capability for all of the new kind of enhancements in Wi-Fi 7, really aimed at improving latency or reducing latency, as well as handling even higher density, more capacity, more client devices. So kind of the typical drumbeat that we're seeing in the Wi-Fi generational standards of not just, making the speeds go higher, but also really starting to focus on how do we handle density? How can we handle hundreds of devices in a relatively small space, all vying for airtime. And the biggest innovation probably in Wi-Fi 7 is in the new 6 gigahertz spectrum, where Wi-Fi 7 now supports 320 megahertz width channels, which is really technical speak for it's really, really fast. So in 5 gigahertz, we had up to 160 megahertz channels, and then in 6 gig or 6 to 7 gigahertz, now that it's so open and so wide, we can double that again. And so that's how we're able to get up to these, several gigabit speeds over Wi-Fi today. Of course, we'll probably get there later in the conversation. All of our products have a built-in smart home hub with Matter, thread border routing, Zigbee, BLE, all of that good stuff. And of course, I think the thing that we're especially proud of is all of our products interoperate together. And that's part of that differentiation around True Mesh and how it works, where you can take a product that we sent out to you in 2015, and it will connect and extend coverage and work perfectly with the device that we're selling in 2024. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is impressive. I think the speeds that we're talking at now are colossal, right? And I think, generally speaking, at both the consumer and at business, we've got kind of two forces at play. We've got the emergence of private 5G networks that are coming out, and but that has its pitfalls actually in quite a number of different contexts, no least from security. But also just that range, as you mentioned, is just colossal, and you start to think actually, like who's sending what so quickly to require that. But from a business aspect and the amount of devices connected to it, and with the latency, as you mentioned, being low and more robust, etc., we kind of have to scale this for tomorrow, right? And where it will be in the future. But do you see residential users having a need for such speed and so on, and what does that look like? Is it the kind of gaming, the streaming generation, etc.?
Yeah, I think certainly there are a lot of customers that just want it. It's available to them, and they get really excited. Being able to download a movie in 20 seconds and being able to see a really big speed test. Do customers need it? I guess I lean on the side of, if you want it, we want to give it to you. Nice. I don't feel like I strictly need it, but it is, it's not just about how can I download things from the internet as fast as possible. Even in my house, I've actually seen situations with the Max 7 where I can move files across my local network at speeds that are now greater than Ethernet, right? Greater than gigabit Ethernet. And so it starts to reframe what you can do with wireless networking, where, I don't need to run cables through my house. Wi-Fi has gotten to the point that it is faster than cabling in some cases. So I think that's really interesting. I do think that there are some customers that are, running servers from their house, or for whatever reason want to tunnel back into their home so that wherever they are in the world, they can print to their printer or play things on their Sonos or whatever the use case is, where having these higher throughputs from the internet are really beneficial and make it so fast that it feels like you're sitting at home on your couch, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a big element to that in the sense of, people will have it because it's available, right? I'm recording this off an M3 laptop, which I absolutely don't need. But I wanted to get it, right? And so I think you've got the technologists that want it, but also, we can't go backwards, and we have to innovate, and we have to create higher standards. But also from the range, as you mentioned, with interference with other devices, etc., or Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi kind of needs its own place, and it needs its own freedom to be able to operate with the emergence now of so many different devices just being connected, and the sheer magnitude of that. So it kind of needs to be a little bit uncluttered, right? So I do get that. You touched on Fred, so Fred would be a really interesting thing to talk about. So Thread's obviously quite an emerging standard now, and people are talking about Thread, and I see that you're personally invested in Thread, and I think you're a Thread guy, or it certainly says so online anyway. So for people that don't understand Thread, can you talk a little bit about what it is and why it's, people are so optimistic about it?
Yeah, I am indeed the Thread guy, at least within Amazon.
Hashtag.
Yeah. We've been working with Thread since about 2015. I think that the Thread group was founded in 2014, so we've been around the technology for quite a while now. At its simplest, I like to describe Thread as Wi-Fi for low power, low bandwidth devices. Of course, there is Wi-Fi Halo, which has maybe confused that analogy, but the main benefits of Thread are, one, it's Internet Protocol or IP based, and specifically IPv6. And what's really cool about that is historically, headless, low power, low data rate IoT devices, for them to communicate with Wi-Fi devices in a home or in a business or communicate with the internet, they would always have to go through a hub. And the hub was a device that would translate a proprietary protocol into Internet Protocol. What's compelling with Thread is it is Internet Protocol. And so a Thread device can talk directly to things on the internet. And it indeed has to go through a device that to a common customer, a common person, looks like a hub. But what it's doing is much more similar to a router, where it's taking IP packets on a Thread network and getting them to the internet. And so I think foremost for me, the coolest thing is you take a $5 Thread dongle that, is a little tiny microcontroller, and you can do things like, download a whole web page, not that you have anything to render it on, but you can download a whole web page, or ping Google or talk to the internet. So I think that's foremost, a big differentiator. The other is it is a mesh, but it's a mesh in a very different way, even different from all of the mesh stuff I talked about with Eero, where Thread is a multi-vendor, completely distributed mesh. And what I mean by that is in Thread, you have routers, which translate or repeat data inside of the network. And then you have a special role, which is called a border router, it's that router that sits at the edge of a Thread network and is usually attached to a Wi-Fi or an Ethernet network and ultimately allows the Thread network to talk to the internet. Thread networks can have multiple border routers from multiple vendors. So imagine in my home, actually, I have Thread border routers in the same Thread network from Eero, Amazon Echo, Google Home, and Apple Home. They're all on the same network. If I unplug any of them, all of my Thread devices can still communicate with the rest of my house and with the internet. And all of those companies are sharing that mesh. And so, unlike Eero, where Eero forms the mesh and it's really for our own devices to communicate, amongst each other, Thread is completely decentralized. And it kind of causes some people's heads to explode because they then ask, well, who's in control of the network? Who's in charge? And the answer is no one. It is, once you hop onto the network, you get all of the same information and all of the same privileges as everyone else. And it's this self-forming thing. So, from a benefit perspective, it uses IP, which is what every device on the internet speaks. It is low power, so you can build devices that run on a coin cell for years. And it is very secure, partly due to the fact that it's a newer protocol that was able to stand on the shoulders of many others and stand on the shoulders of all of the internet engineering that's happened to use the best encryption and the best paradigms for security. So I think I'll stop there.
It's such a good concept, right? And in terms of the interoperability for me, right, to be able to connect different hardware together and all to form part of the thread seems it seems so logical. Are there any pitfalls of this? Can you see a world where actually people don't want to be part of Thread or the OEM or the hardware, or there's some drawback, there's a security challenge or so on. And do you think that might limit potentially the growth or the progression of it?
So, having been around it now for almost a decade, the challenges for Thread historically were that because it is a pure network layer technology, much like Wi-Fi, it kind of sat there waiting for an application layer to come and make use of it. And in a real way, that didn't happen meaningfully until Matter started to evolve. And so now that Matter is becoming a well-adopted application layer protocol, and we can talk about that as well, but the cool thing about Matter is that it runs over Internet Protocol. And so it's the opposite side of the same coin, where it doesn't mandate or expect a network layer, right? So it can run over Ethernet or Wi-Fi or Thread or any other IP-bearing protocol that we invent. Thread really needed an adopted application layer, and so now that we have one, we're seeing Thread get adopted, much more quickly. I think that point that I made around the network really not having an owner, or not enabling a single company to dictate what the policies and rules are on a network. I think for a lot of device makers, that feels unnatural. They're not used to that. It also means that there's a much stronger onus on the community of companies working closely with each other to make sure that things interoperate well, make sure that these many vendor mixed networks work well, that happens. And, I sit on the board for the Thread group for Amazon. I attend all the member meetings. It's a very healthy, vibrant community. And I think for a new device maker coming in, you kind of just have to jump into that community and start, learning the people, the key people, getting involved and figuring out how to make it all work together. Doing it kind of in a vacuum, in a silo with that technology, probably won't be very successful.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it. This is of course why Matter matters, right? And trying to take a step together to try and bring some harmony to quite a noisy environment. So it'd be interesting to see developments specifically around Eero in the future with this and what that looks like and how things will shape. But it's inspiring to hear you talk about it and your view on Thread and with Matter. Just to touch on Matter briefly then. So announced to a lot of acclaim in the past, right? And people talking about, the potential of Matter. Still probably a little way to go actually in terms of members and so on. But are you hopeful that it's going in the right place, in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazon more broadly, colleagues that I know well, we're extremely active and have been a founding member of Matter. It is going in the right direction. Speaking even just as a customer myself, being able to go into a store, buy a device, and have the confidence that I can use it with multiple smart home platforms, smart home controllers, and do so all at once. Not having to choose that I'm going to only set this device up against one controller. That's been really liberating for me in my house, where certain tools, certain platforms are good at some things and others are better at other things. And so it's pretty exciting as a customer to be able to have that choice. And I can attest on that side that it works. I mean, it is delivering on that promise of interoperability. And, from a lay customer, a normal customer perspective, customers don't really care. They don't need to care. And so I think it's the community of companies' jobs to figure out how we just, again, make it simple, make it so that you take this thing out of the box, you plug it in. You may not even know how it connected to your network or what technologies it's using. It just works. And then from that moment on, it works reliably. It stays connected. It's low latency. And that, I think Matter is a great forum for this community, for all these companies to come together along with Thread, to make that a reality. So it's not so much we must sell Matter to customers. It's rather we need to give this set of experiences to customers, and we must interoperate with each other for that to be true.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the analogy is if the customer the analogy that I always think of is if the customer does care, the chances are they care because it isn't working, because they have an opinion, right? They don't care when it just works, but they don't form an opinion. Much like a review, right? People only leave a review if they've had a hard time, right? They don't tell you about the good experience that they had, because why would they, right? They're only emotionally stirred when it is. So I completely agree with you on that, and that kind of takes us on quite nicely to the final part of the show when I wanted to talk about future perspectives. So for you and on behalf of Eero, in terms of exciting possibilities in the future, is it again the further adoption of Matter, increasing standards, and so on? Is that what's kind of really kind of driving innovation forward with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking for Eero specifically, it's again that drumbeat of every day we get some customer report of something not working, and each of these escalations or customer requests end up kind of splintering into a few directions of one, what's the root cause? Like, what's actually going on? And on that side, it's usually some complex combination of a symptom or a scenario we've never seen before, or frankly, our product just continuing to get more and more complex as standards evolve, as we add more capabilities. And so figuring out how to make all of the jigsaw pieces fit together. But it also always splinters into what could we have provided as a tool or as an insight to the customer directly, or to our support team, or to all of the internet service providers that we work directly with. How could we have made it so that I didn't need to go have a Wi-Fi expert on our Wi-Fi and mesh team spend 3 days going really deep and figuring out what happened? And so every day we end up with a handful of, wouldn't it be nice if we had this new tool or this new capability in our product? And so to me, it feels like we've still just scratched the surface of kind of ease of use and helping customers understand why things are happening, or how they can fix them. So I think there's certainly innovation happening there. Of course, AI ML is the hot thing to talk about. But for us, as I was driving in this morning, listening to some of your other episodes, it occurred to me that for us, we actually have a lot of what I think you can term as machine learning, but it's things that we've been doing for years. And so I think that we're now waking up to, how do we explain these to customers? And so there are things that we do behind the scenes around, I mentioned, how our mesh makes decisions, or how we make decisions on where your phone should be connected in the network and how it roams around the network. And so I think, again, in the lens of how do we explain things to customers, it's taking the invention that we've already made and just figuring out how we turn that into something that we can express outward to you. And it's really challenging. Like these, again, we're always towing the line between giving a lot of detail, but also making it simple enough that the average person is like, oh, I get it. That's cool. I understand what it's doing, but without overwhelming them. So that's a lot of what I spend my days thinking about.
Yeah, I can see that. You talk quite eloquently around the future perspectives and what that is, and I guess that's how people will interact in the future with devices. They would be more ubiquitous, not having to worry so much that it is just part of the network and so on. And I guess the important aspect there is how you remain that element of safety, security around it, functionality, and so on. And do you see that happening in the future? Then it just being this thing that's just done. You don't need to worry about it. We talk a lot about IoT and the fact that actually we're just going to not call it anything IoT in the future because it is just what it is, right? It's just a device that's connected, and you don't really need to say it. Is that how you see things going in the future, perhaps in terms of the interaction point of view?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about this as well from the interaction side. Um, I think that it's going to be not that things will only happen automatically, but that things will also happen automatically. There's I have a 2.5 year old, and there are like countless moments in the day where it actually happened for the first time last week, where like she could actually ask an assistant a question, and it was coherent enough that she got the right answer back. And so I still think that voice is a really powerful interface.
Yeah.
I think that our phones, or tablets, or the or devices with a display, I think that those are also very powerful in certain moments. But I've also, as sort of an example, I've been playing around with Home Assistant a lot lately, and Home Assistant is starting to add a lot of automatic automation. I don't know what they're calling it. Things that just happen, or things that get chained together, or things that are more context based, where what's shown on my dashboard is modified based on what room I'm in, or what time of day it is, or who I am. And that to me, like, once you start using it, I think that, sort of to the point you made very early in the conversation around that response of like, how did it ever work a different way? I think we're going to get to that point where it's just the expectation. It becomes so ubiquitous, so anticipated, that when it doesn't work like that, that will be the surprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And that's when the consumer starts to care, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it doesn't work. Yeah. Gabe, it's been great having you on the podcast.
Great.
I've really, really enjoyed it. I think your insights have been fantastic, and it's great to see the innovation within Eero, and keeping that simplicity, right, moving forward, which is something that it's known for. I started the podcast by talking about my dad, and hopefully my dad will still continue to be able to use it and configure it, and not call me, right? That's the litmus test.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions to wrap up, as we always do, with a series of questions. So a little bit off piece, Gabe, but what challenge do you currently face that there is not a solution for in tech at all? There is no tech solution for it, and that you would like to change that?
Interesting. I'm sure that there are tech solutions, but I feel like just keeping our life calendar and our work calendars aligned. I almost feel like my wife and I need a personal assistant at this point. And so I'm optimistic that some AI can solve that for us. But literally, we spend our Sunday nights now sitting on the couch, comparing our calendars, figuring out who's doing daycare pickup and drop off, and all of that. And so I think that's what comes to mind for me.
Do you know what? I feel the same. I end up pulling into my work phone when I'm going to go and see the new Mad Max film, right? Or when I'm going to do this. And I think, well, why is that in my work calendar? But if it's not in my work calendar, I won't necessarily remember it, or it might clash with something that comes up anyway. So I completely get it. I'm on that one with you, Gabe. What's a gadget that you can't live without? And you can't say your Eero device at home.
Yeah. I have and this is not an ad or a plug. I have a Spin coffee maker, SPINN.
Okay.
I saw it at CES 2 years ago. It is not a super automatic, meaning it doesn't froth your milk for you. It doesn't make lattes, but it just makes like pour over style and espresso and that kind of stuff. But again, like now that we have a toddler, being able to just like push a button and get a decent coffee out of it, that's a gadget that I probably can't live without now.
Okay, all right, I might check it out. Yeah. I do a V60 pour over myself, but we do it manually, and it kind of takes a bit of time. Right?
Yeah, too much time.
Yeah, it does. Most unexpected thing that you've learned this month?
Yeah. Last week, I had some Tesla Powerwalls and solar installed at a house that I've lived in for about a year now. And none of that is that novel, except I watched them install solar in about 2 to 3 hours, and then the next day, multiple Powerwalls in about 2 to 3 hours. And it startled me at how modular and how sort of well packaged all of this home energy stuff is getting, that it, the average installer can do this in a few hours and fully light up your home. It just totally blew me away.
Jeez, I suppose, do you know what? I suppose they need to, right? With
Yep.
the way things are going in the EV market, and if we are
Yeah.
all gonna, bin the ice off, right?
Yep.
That's incredible. And finally, what's a passion that what's a passion outside of work, outside of Wi-Fi and connectivity?
Yeah. I really like to work out. I'm a big guy.
Okay.
I about 5 years ago walked into a gym, off very randomly. There was a community of people there that compete in strongman. I know strongman's really popular in the UK, actually.
Yeah.
And I kind of just caught the bug and have been competing for a few years and do it off and on as an amateur. And I just really enjoy doing it outside of work. But now that I have a toddler and a house built in the 60s, most of my time goes to swim practice and fixing up the house.
Okay, it's a bit eerie, that is, because aside looking vaguely similar, I also like going to the gym, and I'm actually going to train after this podcast, which is bizarre.
I'm jealous.
Well, it's the morning for you, right? It's the evening for me. It's coming up at 7 p.m. Gabe, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the IoT podcast. I've had a blast.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.